Welcome and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, The Pros and Cons of Shared and Outsourced Services. Today we're going to be discussing how you can streamline your operations, save money, and avoid common mistakes of sharing and outsourcing services. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over I'm going to introduce my colleagues, Sabrina Hauser, owner of Capital CFO, and Liz Chipman, Director of Nonprofit Services, have joined me today. I'm Katie Stair, and we'll be presenting today's webinar to you. So now I'm going to turn it over to Sabrina to give us a brief introduction of Capital CFO.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Capital CFO outsources bookkeepers and chief financial officers for companies and nonprofits that need the expertise, but just not necessarily full-time. We also offer a lot of consulting services for nonprofits that go above and beyond bookkeeping and CFO work. And we also assist companies and nonprofits with recruitment assistance. So that's a little bit about us. And now I want to introduce our other director, Liz, as she goes over just a few housekeeping things.
Morning, everybody. Some housekeeping before we get started, just so that you can get all the information from this webinar. We'll be monitoring the chat function throughout. So if you have any questions or comments, you can put them in the chat box. You can do that at any time during the presentation, and we will try to address them before we leave. If not, if we don't get to do that before the webinar is over, we'll reach out to you afterward. If you're calling by phone and you don't have access to the video function, you can email questions to me. That's Liz, L-I-Z, at capitalcfollc.com, and I'll be checking my email periodically. And if you have any technical difficulties, please reach out to us in the chat box and we'll address those as quickly as we can. And also wanted to let you know that this session is being recorded, and we will send out a recording of this session afterward to everyone who registered and attended this webinar, and also want to let you know that it will be uploaded to the Capital CFO YouTube channel afterward as well. So you will have access to that information afterward as well. And enjoy the webinar. Glad to have you here.
Great, thanks, Liz. And you'll certainly be hearing from Sabrina and Liz throughout today. So now we're going to get started. First, we want to discuss the main differences and similarities between shared and outsourced services so that we understand kind of what we're talking about today. Shared and outsourced services have a lot in common, but also some distinct differences that set the two options apart from each other. In order to effectively evaluate what is best for your for or non-for-profit business, it's helpful to know your options. So we'll start with shared services. Shared services are typically administrative or overhead services that are developed by two or more organizations that collaborate to jointly access the time and expertise of contractors, employees, or finance services. And shared services leverage the economies of scale that are created when multiple organizations access services from the same service provider. Shared services is typically a model utilized by nonprofit organizations, though certainly the model could be of benefit to small businesses as well. And generally, shared services include multiple services as part of a packaged deal. So you're typically working with one entity that provides several services, as opposed to when you look at outsourced services, they tend to be a little bit more straightforward. And in the case of outsourced services, a business contracts with a third party to perform services that were or could be performed in-house. So like shared services, outsourcing helps businesses and organizations achieve economies of scale and find efficiencies by helping them purchase services they may not otherwise be able to afford, or for some it may be simply that they do not require a full-time position for that service. Outsourcing can include just one service or multiple services, but they are typically outsourced individually. Common shared and outsourced services include accounting and finance, human resources, marketing, training, fundraising, grant writing, and IT. And in addition, when we talk about shared services, Space also tends to be included and allows like-minded organizations to locate together as well as share a package of services. So we want to share some best practices as you consider either embarking on a shared or outsourced services model. Some of the benefits to sharing and outsourcing services is first that you're hiring an expert in their field. And this means that you're engaging with someone who has the training and expertise to lead whatever service you're hiring them for. For example, if you're outsourcing human resources services, you're hiring someone who is capable of managing all of your human resources needs. This increases efficiency for your business and expands your capabilities as a business because you, as a leader, know this service is being managed by someone who knows what they're doing and how to do it and how to offer you the guidance to be successful. Sharing and outsourcing services also helps you to reduce employee-related costs. And this is because you're working with an expert. They come with all the training and expertise, and you don't have to pay for it. You also don't have to incur the typical expenses of hiring and retaining staff as you would in a typical staff relationship. It's also easier to transition if things aren't working out, or if you have a business need to change the relationship, such as budget reductions. And we all know as leaders how hard it is to part ways with staff no matter what the reason. So in a contractual relationship, you simply end or change the contract based on the terms of agreement, and it really is generally as simple as that. Another benefit to sharing and outsourcing services is scalability. You can scale up or scale down depending on where things are with your operations. So we already used the example of a potential need to scale down if your budget changes or the landscape changes. But in contractual relationships, you can also easily scale up if needed, just as simply as I mentioned before, changing the terms of your contract and the agreement you have with your outsourced service provider. And then finally, cost and time savings offers you the opportunity to leverage your knowledge and skills to your advantage. It also frees up existing staff time to focus on what they do best and leave the rest to the experts. And some of the best practices that we want to share is first to establish a relationship of trust. And when you're looking into a shared or outsourced services provider, you really need to recognize that you're entrusting an essential function of your business to an outside entity. And that means you're trusting them to guide and manage that role. So you really need to find someone that you trust implicitly. You also want to carefully define the terms of your agreement, and this refers to the contract that you're going to enter in either a shared or outsourced services model. You need to determine your needs and define the terms of agreement in advance. And it's helpful to remember that changes to the scope of the project can result in unanticipated added costs over time. So especially if budget is important, when we're talking to our non-for-profit partners, you need to know what you need in advance so that you can ask for that and not have those changes in costs. We want you to make sure that you plan ahead and communicate often. Planning and communication are both key elements to a successful shared or outsourced services relationship. You're going to want to establish your timelines and expectations and clearly manage them and stay in touch with your contractor, because that's the best way that you're going to assure that you get what you need when you need it. And finally, be involved. As a leader, you have to play a key part in the process. Unfortunately, outsourcing and sharing services doesn't mean you're totally off the hook. You're still in charge of managing the project, managing your own expectations, and assuring, as I mentioned before, the planning and communication elements are in place so that you get the deliverables that you need and when you need them. Our recommendations, and we do have some handouts to offer at the end of the presentation, but we do recommend that you carefully vet your prospects. Do your research to find a team that will work with you, not just for you. And we have some resources that will kind of provide you with a checklist as you are considering potential shared or outsourced service providers, so that you can ask the right questions, you can prepare what you think your terms of agreement would be and what the scope of your project would be, so that you can clearly communicate that and find the right entity to work with to meet your needs. As I mentioned before, planning and communication, we can't recommend this enough. Plan ahead. Don't wait until the last minute to ask for a project or a task to be completed. And this is important so that you have a clearer understanding of the expectations, but also so that the consultant you're working with has a clear understanding and can meet your needs. There's nothing worse than calling at the last minute and finding out that maybe they're working on another project, or they don't have the time or the opportunity to drop everything and jump on your project. If you plan ahead, you don't have to worry about that. Finally, communication is key. We recommend that you set up a regular and defined schedule to stay in contact with your consultant. You may choose to have a more hands-off approach to working with your consultant, but regardless, you're going to want to stay in touch with them to make sure that you're getting what you need when you need it, and that the expectations are being clearly defined. So what is the right option for your business? And we know we have for-profit and not-for-profit partners on the call with us today. And so we want to talk about both options because really not-for-profits are businesses just like for-profit businesses. We just generally tend to be funded a little bit differently. So the first option we're going to talk about is those that are typically available to not-for-profit organizations. And we have an image here that is really very beautiful and helpful to understand many of the different options that exist for nonprofits. I want to start by not taking credit for this image. We did borrow it from the Nonprofit Centers Network. And the Nonprofit Centers Network is an organization that focuses wholly on shared services for nonprofits. So if this is an option that you think is something you want to pursue, I highly recommend visiting their website. They have loads of information. This image came from an 8-page packet on rethinking overhead, as it is titled, and they have a lot of really great information on the various opportunities that nonprofits can pursue. So I want to focus in mostly on joint contracting and going solo. And you can see here in this image, everyone's trying to climb the same mountain. And essentially what they're showing here is that there are different ways to get to the top. Everyone's going to get there. Everyone has the means to get there, but there are different ways to do so. And so when you look at connective mechanisms, this is really just talking about how nonprofits work together. This is before any sharing of services, but might refer to how nonprofits work in partnership to improve their bottom line. Nonprofits also very much have the option of going solo. And as I said, we're going to focus on that a little bit. And this is where you're talking about outsourcing services. So nonprofits can engage to have their bookkeeping outsourced, or their human resources, or grant writing or fundraising, and engage with an individual entity to provide that service. And it certainly can help that entity help to get to their bottom line of achieving their mission. But when we're thinking about shared services, as I mentioned, there is a little bit of a difference between shared and outsourced services. And so shared services tends to be where like-minded organizations are getting together and saying, hey, we have a need to secure these handful of services, and we think we can do well by securing them together. And so as they mention here, you share the ride with others, and together build economies of scale and purchasing power by jointly choosing and contracting with service providers. So that's where you get into multiple services, sharing that with another organization and really working closely together. Other options include management service organizations and fiscal sponsorship. Management service organizations do exist across the country. We just don't have a whole ton right here in the capital region, but there are several within New York State and several across the country, where essentially an entity comes to be and provides these services, provides location to bring in small nonprofits to help them be successful and to help them not have to focus on overhead services, but to be able to purchase those services. And same and very similar is with fiscal sponsorship, where a large fiscal sponsor may come in and help you to pay for those overhead services, which I think from the nonprofit perspective, we all hope to achieve, and certainly could be something that some local nonprofits do end up pursuing and achieving. Oh, sorry, went a little too far. For-profit businesses, when you're talking about probably more of a typical outsourced services model, we borrowed some information from WebChain, and I included the information here as well. And here are some different ways to go about outsourcing services. So we talked a little bit about how you might select a vendor and engage in a outsourced services contract. And here are some of the types of models that you may engage in. And they include a vendor managed team where your consultant is managing the project, a client managed team where likely you or one of your staff are managing the project, or staff augmentation where you might be outsourcing a service to bring staff into your operations. So in a vendor managed team, the vendor typically provides the time, architecture, development, and testing of a project, whereas the client is really there to provide the product or service knowledge and talk about what their needs are so that the vendor can determine how best to achieve them. Whereas in a client managed team, really you as the client are telling the vendor how you want, generally how you want the project to be accomplished. So the client or you are responsible for the scope management, outlining the terms of agreement, product or project development, and design. And then when we talk about staff augmentation, that's where you're looking to expand your skill set by covering some areas demanded by an ongoing project. The client, again, is really responsible for the management of the scope and the terms of agreement and the project outline, whereas the vendor is going to provide that staff member directly to your team. So where do you start? We recommend, and we do have a handout again to this end, we recommend that you start, whether you're considering shared or outsourced services, that you start by establishing your goals. You really want to analyze all the processes and tasks that you are looking to outsource. Understand the details, learn how it's done, why you do it, and what it costs you, specifically either if you're performing the service, what it costs you in time and money, but also if you have a staff or had a staff doing it, what it costs. So you really understand if you're able to achieve cost savings as well as time savings. You want to identify your main goal in establishing outsourced or shared services. And again, this could be cost savings, this could be time saving, this could be staff augmentation. It really could be a number of things, but if you have a specific goal, you want to outline that so that you know that you're going to meet it with whatever service provider you choose. Then you want to define the overall scope of the project or relationship. And this is where you're really providing those definitions of your expectations that are going to come into play when you're developing a contract or the term of agreement with your contractor. Finally, determine the type of business relationship that you are considering, whether it's short-term because you have a very specific project you're working on that has an end goal, or a long-term collaborative partnership where you maybe are looking to establish a long-term relationship, which often happens with bookkeeping, might also happen with human resources and some of the other examples that we gave. Then you want to determine your options. This is where you're going to start researching the firms that offer the services you need. Do a little bit of research, look up their website, who they work with, how they do their work, and then reach out to each firm and gather information on how exactly it works to work with them and what you can expect. Do they have the capabilities you're looking for? Are they among the top providers in the field in your area? Do they have a good reputation? Maybe you can even get some references so that you can talk with people they work with. What do they charge? How do they charge? How often are they going to bill you? What level of service can they offer? Are they really able to meet everything that you need as you've previously defined? And then who is the main point of contact for you, the client? And this may be really important for you to know whether or not you have a dedicated point of contact, or if you're able to contact anyone and anyone at the firm is able to work with you. Different organizations have different models, and you'll really want to take that into consideration when you're thinking about what's going to work best for you. Finally, once you've identified the contractor and you're able to get into a contract, establish your working relationship. And this is where you're going to identify your point of contact, get to know them, you know, who you're going to be working with. Establish your communication plan, as we recommended earlier, and determine a timeline for deliverables. You're going to want to internally develop a monitoring framework to ensure both parties maintain their obligations, and then schedule regular review meetings. This is where you're going to be able to catch up on what's happening with your contract, with the work that you have hired to have done. It's also where you can offer feedback, and it's where it becomes really important to be honest. If something is going wrong, you're going to want to address it immediately, because typically it's easier to address that molehill before it turns into a mountain. And usually there's an opportunity to correct, to make adjustments, either to your terms of agreement or to the way the project is being done, so that you can improve and move forward in a positive light. As I mentioned, we have a few tools and resources that we are going to share that cover the information we've shared today. A planning tool to help guide you, and then also a specific tool that offers tips for selecting and working with outsourced vendors. And this is going to help you to go through that interview process and that selection process in order to find the entity that's going to be right for you. So at this point, I want to open it up to any questions. Liz, I think I saw some activity in the chat box. I'm not sure if that was all addressed or if there are any questions.
No questions yet, Katie, but we'll see.
Well, we certainly want to open it up. Anyone is welcome to throw a question into the chat box, or if you are so inclined, we could probably figure out how to unmute you and let you join us. Okay, well, if we don't have any questions, I'd like to turn it over to Sabrina.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was really informative and helpful. I just want to remind everybody that the main 3 reasons that we all talk about why outsourcing works is that it does bring an expert in. It saves you time and money because you're not paying for payroll, vacation, benefits, and all of the fringe that goes into that. You're not paying for training that person. They're an expert that's coming in and able to do the work, sometimes in a lot shorter of time. And it levels the playing field. So it makes you feel like you have a department, whether that's an HR department or a marketing department or an accounting department. Even if you're, you know, the smallest of the small to the biggest of big, it levels the playing field for everybody. And that becomes the expert that's working on whatever project you need. Outsourcing is great for short-term projects. If you are a larger company and you just need an extra set of, 5-10 hours that week, they're great for long-term projects and retention as well. So Just remember that you're not supposed to know it all, whether you're a business or a nonprofit. You got into this to do your thing. So that doesn't mean that you're an HR expert, that you're a CFO, a bookkeeper, a marketer, you're a content writer. You can't be all of those things and you can't do them well. And a lot of times, if you're not doing those things accurately, you're going to actually get yourself into some trouble and your team into some trouble. So reach out and get the experts you need. Just a little bit more about Capital CFO. We've talked through all of our bookkeeping and CFO work that we do for both nonprofits and businesses. And then we just also wanted to list out the consulting work that we do specifically for our nonprofits. So both Katie and Liz are directors of nonprofit services with us. And the three of us together work on strategic planning for nonprofits, board development that includes recruitment and training of board members. We do interim ED and transition planning, training and workshops around budgeting, fund development, governance. We can do impact assessments. We do grant writing, which also can include just grant research, and then outreach and communication. And part of our interim ED services do include coaching and mentoring brand new CEOs and executive directors as well. So that's probably the thing that we enjoy doing the most. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to let us know. I think the next page has all of our contact information. Yep, so this is how you can reach all of us at any time. We will be sending out the webinar and the worksheets that Katie talked about. We're going to be doing that via email. We'll also share it on the Capital CFO LinkedIn page today, and we'll share it on our YouTube page. So feel free to share that with anybody that wasn't able to join us or anybody in your network. If anybody needs the worksheets that we're going to be sharing, we're happy to share those. So please feel free to spread those around as well. And that's it from all of us at Capital CFO today. So thank you, Katie, again, for all of your research and help in pulling that together. And Liz for being so diligent with the chat box. And if you guys need us, don't hesitate to reach out. Have a great week, everybody.